Hey, everybody. Ed Gow Jr. from Dad Central here on the Dad Central Show with co-host, co-producer, leader of Dad Central, director of Dad Central Ontario, Drew Solon. What's going on, Drew?
Not much said. Looking forward to another great conversation.
Yeah, we're going to have another great conversation. And let's do the stuff right off the top. The Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care, who believes care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is positive impact. So we like to say thanks to Dove Men Care. Well, we're looking for another epic conversation today, Drew.
Yeah, we are. We're excited to have Dr. John Oliffe. We've been fortunate. Dr. Oliffe has been involved with us. About 2 years ago, we got connected to him. We did a panel of experts, and he was fantastic as a guest. I think maybe my most favorite aspect of John is that he is a Denver Broncos fan, but we won't talk about football today. We'll talk more about
No, you mean dads? There's dads that don't want to talk about football. Wow, they're gonna turn off the program now.
Well, that's why I had to get that plug in there.
Okay.
I got my son hooked up with the Broncos stuff, and I'm looking forward to having some fun. But so John, he's actually the founder and lead investigator of UBC's Men's Health Research Program, and his research is focused on masculinities as it influences men's health behaviors and illness management, but also its impact on partners, families, and overall life quality. So at the end of the day, John's got a ton of experience and knowledge, and I'm really excited to just dig into the conversation with him and hear what he's got to say. And I think they've got some exciting research coming up too that might be really relevant for our audience. So I'm excited about that.
Well, let's bring up your fellow Broncos fan. There he is.
Hey, Ed. Hey, Drew.
Hey, John.
How you doing, John? How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah.
Good stuff. Gotta ask, how long have you been a Broncos fan, and how long have you been suffering?
I backpacked through America. I think it was the 90s, the early 90s, the Elway days, and I became enamored with them. And I like the brand, and I love the NFL in terms of packaging sports. So I've followed them keenly ever since, and I can feel another wave coming. Yeah.
Well, I think your two favorite words in your vocabulary is the drive. So I'll leave it at that, but it's always a pleasure to have you share your wisdom, your thoughts, your research for fathers and those who love them. And we're really looking for a great conversation today. So, Drew, I'll let you open up the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get a little bit background into sort of John. How did we want to know, what was life like for you growing up? How did you become, before you became John Oliffe?
Yeah, so grew up in Australia, so not from Canada, but have had the last 20 years there. One of the keen points about growing up was that we would move every couple of years, to the point where I thought we might have been in the witness protection program at one point, because this truck would roll up every 3 years and move us to another little town. So it's kind of, you get exposed to things, and I think as a young kid, I would be in different classes, and I think I had 5 primary schools, different ones. And you observe. I think what happened for me is I started to observe things because you didn't necessarily have mates that would carry through a lifetime, right? So you tend to be a watcher. And I think early on, I noticed behaviours, and I noticed what people do, and it sort of transgressed into what I did for a job, which was, I went nursing. I worked 20 years in the emergency room, and again, you just kind of start to observe. Observation's really keen there. You need to be, cued to that sort of stuff. And I think that kind of got me into the space of thinking about behaviours in health, and in particular men's health. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a rough précis of the last, some 9 years now.
Wow, fantastic. That's great. Want to ask you, you were already in the health field, but what made you focus on researching on men's health and also becoming the founder of the UBC Health Research? So I think those are two separate questions. So if you could attack the first one, what got you interested in the men's health field, researching about it?
Yeah, like from a personal level, I had a grandfather who passed from prostate cancer, and I spent some time with him growing up, and he struggled with substance use, and so he died of prostate cancer, but really there were so many collateral issues around for him and his family, and I was exposed to some of that, and I craved to understand some of that in a little bit more detail. Um, and like he said before he passed, one of the last things he said to my father was that he didn't want to be the way he was. And anyway, so it just gets inside you, and you start to try to want to make sense of it. And then professionally, working clinically for 20 years in the emerge room, you see a lot of behaviours, and I'd see guys come into the emergency room, they'd be sweating, they'd be clutching middle chest, and they'd be denying chest pain. And we would triage them as cardiac because they were most of the time, and just really wondered about those behaviours, and what sort of conditioning had occurred for those fellas to have them show up in that way. So so I guess professionally and personally, I'd had some exposures that that I crave to make sense of, to be honest. Yeah.
Right.
And so I come from a place of trying to understand behaviors and trying to talk about patterns in men's behaviors, and also the variation on the patterns, which I think are equally important, to help us really be applied in how we assist and enable guys to live better lives.
I just want to go a little bit deeper in regards to and thanks for sharing that experience with your family, and condolences on your grandfather passing away. And I'm very humbled that you've taken your lived experience and made it part of your professional career, which is really strong. That's really strong. But I'd like to know the moment you said, John, we're going to do this.
Yeah, great question. So I guess, I started to do a PhD because I wanted to understand how to do research. And I knew I wanted to look at prostate cancer, men's experience of prostate cancer, and in large part to make sense of my experience growing up, grandfather, and because it wasn't clinically, we didn't see a lot of prostate cancer in the emerge room, or if we did, it wasn't our focus. So I I just was interested, and so I didn't have this master plan of building an empire or a research program. I just as I remained just interested. So I didn't have the big. It wasn't like a really fully fledged plan. It kind of happened to me, but I was just genuinely interested. So yeah, I'm not. I don't know that I'm a planner.
Right.
I don't plan for things. I enjoy what I'm doing, and when I don't, I stop. And I haven't stopped doing men's health. I've just enjoyed it. Yeah.
Good. When you
Yeah,
started, go ahead, Drew.
go ahead. I was going to say I wanted to keep going on this, so because the other part of your story that you shared was it sounded like there was a tremendous amount of purpose behind why you chose to begin pursuing, your career and then this research, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about how that experience that you had with your own family and your own grandfather kind of fed into this sense of purpose for you?
Yeah. So a lot of research will describe problems, you know, and we can 90% of what we do we can describe problems, but I had and still do have a craving for application. So if I find something out, I want to then be in a space of making a difference. So so whether it's building a program online or whether it's helping clinicians to understand the things that they might see, they're the kind of things. So the application is the drive. And I don't know if I've answered your question, Drew, but it's that it's not just the art of doing the research and the skills that go with that. It's very much about it has to be applied, and I think that comes from the clinical space because it had to be applied, had to make sense. But also when you're trying to unravel things that you've seen in family and in experiences, I think it's applied in that way too at a personal level. So like a double drive, you know, um, on wanting to do the work and wanting to do better work, as well.
Yeah, I'll just comment on that and then pop it over to you, Ed. I think that's really important because when we think about the work we're doing to help support fathers, we want very much what we're providing, whether it be resources, whether it be information, whatever is to be taken and then applied to see the impact. Because at the end of the day, we know that fathers, the role that they play in families, especially with their children, and as children grow, the health, the outcomes of children are significantly impacted for the better when you have a positive father. And so it's very much about application. So I love the fact that you had the natural curiosity and drive to dig deeper, but then with the whole goal of how do we then now apply this to see changes for the better, which is
Absolutely.
fantastic. So I just want to again piggyback on Ed's comments to you. It's fantastic to be able to talk about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So, John, when you started doing the research, how many other men were doing the research when you started?
Um, yeah, so it's so interesting. I like to think that men's health has been informed by women's health. So the focus on women's health began from my viewpoint, around about the 90s, in the early 90s, and then there was this movement to bring in men's health, and I was probably one of the early people that were involved in that, I guess. But I was a little bit different because much of what was being done was biomedical, and it was all this trope about men don't live as long as women, and men don't go to the doctor. And as a starting place, that was okay for me, but I didn't want to just talk to that and a whole deficit model. I wanted to talk to a strength-based model and an asset building space. Let's talk about what guys do well. Let's norm that. Let's move that into a space of changing the narrative, which is, blokes die younger than women and don't go to the doctor. I mean, that's unhelpful. Like answering the questions about why and addressing the people who go run counter to that is really important. So I was one of the few, and I was a bit different to the biomedical focus that was there, that was trading on disease. I was talking about illness from the outset most of the time.
Okay. So tell us how did the journey begin becoming the founder of the UBC Men's Health Research Program? How did that start? Because I already see the smile on your face, so I know there's a story behind that.
Yeah. So I'm in Australia. I've started the PhD. I'm rough. I'm really rough around the edges. I'm about 3 chapters in, and this thing is 7 chapters. And I interview at UBC because I had it in my mind that I would like to, you know, move out, and get some international experience. So I interview at UBC, and they say, "Come on over. We'll give you 2 years to finish the PhD." And so I did. And they're very patient because it's 20 years later. So the deal just kept going. But the support to build it, to build a program of research was there. It was unbelievably there. So I finished the PhD within 10 months of getting to Vancouver. And then they just supported me to be a better researcher because I was still rough around the edges in terms of how I was applying things and working through, because I was a rookie, and just worked through with great mentorship. I had Joan Bator, Joy Johnson, Sally Thorne, Pam Ratton, all these big name researchers in nursing, and they really, really looked after me in terms of, some hard yards. But if I was willing to do the work, they were just great backstops in terms of helping me see a program of research. Because sometimes when you start out, you're just in one project and you can't see it could be bigger, like a programmatic piece, and they could see it. I couldn't see it, and they kind of pushed me and mentored me. So that's how it got started, and the web piece and all of it, was just great mentors and a ton of hard work, but great mentors, to guide me through. And it's just been impossible to leave. It's been such a joy to be at UBC and have those kind of opportunities that the work is just growing. Yeah.
Excellent.
That's
Good to
great,
know.
John. So let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about maybe some of the application stuff. So when it comes to men's health, and you've been involved with so much research, what's that research shown about the connection to a man's health and then family life? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we've done work. Maybe I can talk a little bit about men's depression um, in this context. We did some work and continue to do work in men's depression, and we were driven by this discordant relationship. That being that men are diagnosed with depression at half the rate of women, but they suicide at 3 to 4 times the rate of women. So there's something in that black box, that pathway between, depression and suicide, that I wanted to unpack. And when you talk about men's health and issues around depression, we miss a lot of men's depression when they turn up clinically, because it doesn't show up as necessarily as crying and deep introspection. A lot of times it shows up as anger, substance use, over involvement in sports and work. And so we sort of felt like we were missing some things there. So we talked to clinicians about that. And then the way mental health and depression plays out is at home. So we talked to the partners of guys as well, to get a sense of some of the pressures and how it plays out. And I think that it was just a great experience to understand a lot of, in straight couples, a lot of women will take on the primary provider, health advisor in the family, which will include taking on the guy's dour mood and depression. And, the rippling effect of that is huge. And a lot of guys would rely on partners rather than seeking outside help, like keep it in-house. And so, again, when we talk about help seeking, we're often really talking about convincing guys that you need an external team, because it's too much pressure on a relationship and family life, to deal with some of those things. But we equally are talking to the partners about affirming, norming that a guy would seek the help. And the toughest thing with depression is that you often have to ask for help professionally from a professional source more than once. It's not a one-time thing. It's to find the right team fit. It's often something you've got to ask and go and see multiple people to get through. So you've got to be pretty resilient in the act of help seeking. So, none of these things happen just to men. And we've been very, very clear over the years about gender relations. Like, whatever happens for a bloke happens to the people around him. Generally, there's going to be a ripple. So we've been very cued to trying to make a difference to guys. That might be the insertion point, but we're very, very cued to the collateral challenges for people in their lives.
I want to build from that, John, in regards to how, from your research, has men's health and family life, has the situation gotten better during the research? And especially if you've done any research, what impact has the pandemic had about connection to health and family life?
Yeah. So we've just done some work on relationships, and we interviewed guys about the breakup of a relationship. Really interesting work. We collected the data during COVID, so we do these Zoom interviews,
Yeah.
which were kind of new, and because usually we're in the room and we're talking direct, and so it changed it. But I've got to say, I'm not 100% sure, but I talk about COVID casualties within the context of, if you put people in a confined space, you isolate them to some level in the domestic sphere, and we're locked down in a pandemic. I think it can certainly put pressure on relationships, and I think that maybe I spoke to someone the other day, interviewed someone, and he said, if there's cracks in the foundation, then COVID would be something that really would, amplify that. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I've probably gone off on a bit of a tangent, but just to say, relationships and how family life plays out. I don't remember a period in history when there has been more pressure on the domestic sphere.
Would you say that there's just going on that what you just said, do you feel that there's never been as much pressure on dads and men as we've had in the last few years?
Yeah, well, so transitions are something I find fascinating. So it can be a transition to a diagnosis of prostate cancer or depression, or it can be a transition that's invoked on you at retirement, bereavement, divorce. And we all experienced a transition with COVID, and it was deep uncertainty. And so, you know, and there remains so deep uncertainty. So it was the perfect storm, you know, that transition, because, you know, for dads who are there, um, in that they're having transitions in terms of the care of the family. They might have challenges around their work. Things might be shifting in certain industries. Um, and it's the perfect storm in terms of COVID has given a lot of guys and everyone, but if we're talking about guys, giving guys a pause to reflect on the past, because not enough's happening presently. And if you ruminate on the past long enough, that's depression, that's depressive symptoms, and deep anxiety about the future. And so uncertainty about the future is anxiety, like it's forward based. You worry about what's coming, and you don't know what's coming. So it's been a massive, challenging time, and not to doom and gloom it. The upshot of it is that you and I and Drew, we can get a conversation now about anxiety and depression, and we know what we're talking about, because I'll guarantee you there's no one who hasn't been affected within these transitions that we don't have control over. And we don't have control of even the information that's coming in and the conflicting information. So it's been a tough time. And I think there's been a lot of transitions for dads, and just a massive amount of pressure, you know, within adapting, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that because in some of the data that we have and some of the presentations we've been building in the past couple of years, we already knew dads were feeling pressure before, right? I think there was a 2015 survey done by Baby Center that said 9 in 10 millennial dads feel they need to be the perfect dad versus only 8 in 10 millennial moms. So it was already, they already creating this internal pressure. 36% of them felt that they couldn't meet the demands of home and work already. So, I mean, there was already this happening before that. And as you said, when you add the pressure of that uncertainty, internal and externally, it is a recipe for, something's got to give, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And Drew, just to say, there is a whole discourse about contemporary fatherhood, and
mm,
and it's about not being your forefather who might have been an absent provider or detached from family. So there's a discourse about how you're meant to be, and that's very, very positive, and it's very persuasive. But the operationalization of that, as you say, it there's challenges. There's challenges with that, because a lot of times I think identity with men's work is a really interesting area, because it might be that we have a different connection to work perhaps than our forefathers, but at the same time it's identity making. It's the majority of what we do. So it's like again, that juggle is it doesn't go away. That identity work is hard work. It's hard work.
mhm. Yeah, I think there's a strong connection there with when you think about your own experience with your father as a dad, and how that feeds into your own identity, and then how that feeds into your ability to show up as a dad, or your even thoughts about being a dad. you know um, I, for my personal experience, I had a challenging experience growing up, and that translated to me in terms of being very passionate about becoming a dad and taking it as a very serious, important role. And I worked extremely hard to try and make it, bring that vision that I had into reality. That actually came at a cost. I just didn't realize that at the time. So I think that identity piece is very interesting. Is there any? Is there anything more you can share about that, or?
Um, it's a bit of a tangent, but just feeding off what you're saying, I so agree with you. The intergenerational piece of masculinity and fathering roles, work roles, is really fascinating. Just to go back to interviewing guys about the breakup of a relationship, we heard from a lot of men that there was no template for relationships because what had worked for their dad, you know, was not going to work for them. There's been massive shifts in how we operationalize relationships, the expectations of emotional availability, of how we are, our awareness, massive shifts that even if you were witness to a nice functional relationship in the home as you were growing up, the essence of the division of labor within the house, who did what, who said what, who was responsible for what, it's going to be different in your relationship. And so the guys would say, where do you learn that stuff? Because you're negotiating that stuff with a partner. You've got no template to build from. You're just in the eye of the storm trying to work this out with someone else, and that's another variable, right, with the partner. So that identity work as a partner, as well as being a dad, it's a lot of work, and it's very nuanced and it's different every time.
Mm. Well, maybe this is a good time for us to maybe talk specifically about this idea of relationships. So, maybe from your research, can you tell us what gets in the way of men building healthier relationships? I think you did touch on some of them, but can you lay it out for us very simply so that we can know, okay, here's the warning signs. What's getting in
Yeah,
our way?
yeah. So one thing that we heard a lot from guys is that they stay in distressed relationships, and one of the ways they do it is that they self-censor. So you've got views, you've got feelings, you're not articulating them. You are sucking them down and you're holding them in, and you're doing it for a good cause. You're doing it because you want to avoid further conflict because it's already distressed. So if you say something, it might just gaslight the situation. So you just withdraw. So it's one of the things that we heard. So that I called it self-censoring, and there is an argument. There's a counter argument that that's exerting power when a man's stoic in a relationship and doesn't say that it exerts power. Most of the testimonials I heard, the guys are employing it as a form of protection to keep the relationship alive. The trouble with it is that it has a limited tenure. You can't survive in that for a long period of time indefinitely, or maybe you do, and there's just really a separate life, separate partner lives. So that was one of the things that really struck us as key information. And one of the things that guys said in terms of remedy was they needed a set time, an opportunity on a regular basis that would be to sit down with their partner and talk about the relationship, not about friends and family and all the rest, but the relationship, how the relationship was going, its purpose, what the goals were, what things were moving, what things were working, what things might need adjustment. And the communication around that was one of the things that we heard time and time again in the retrospect of having gone through a breakup, that's what you needed to formalize it. And so it's interesting because relationships happen to men a lot of times. They don't necessarily, it just kind of, it happens. And this was more of a constructed way to try and work through and keep an eye on the relationship in terms of adjustments and things. So I thought those were two things that I was piqued by hearing those from guys, because personally I don't think I'd probably ever thought about those things, right? Formalizing the communication. So I think it's been very, very helpful, to hear that from guys.
John, I want to just ask, and I think it's a carryover I want to ask from our last conversation piece, but when you're talking to these fathers, these men, where are they getting their cues about how to conduct themselves in a relationship?
Yeah. So part of what we want to try and do is get upstream, because the majority of these men, it's the crisis point. Like, it's the end of the relationship, it's the distressed relationship that prompts them to go, okay, I'm going to go on the internet, I'm going to look for some things that might help me, I'm going to talk to family and friends to try and get an angle on it, I might go and get professional help. So there's a kind of a tiered system that most guys do. But the trouble, not the trouble, the challenge for us as researchers is to try and introduce the idea of building better relationships rather than waiting until crisis to then address it. And I think a classic point in case is is just to say, a lot of the guys talk to us about me then we. So the idea that they had to work on their identity, to understand what it is they wanted from a relationship and how they wanted to show up in the relationship. And that was often done again in the aftermath of a breakup. So there were some learnings there. It's trying to introduce the skill set earlier on, and that kind of introspection and that kind of communication piece earlier on for guys, because they're mopping up, and that's hard work when you're in crisis, or harder
True.
work, I think.
Drew, you want to ask any more on this?
Um, well, the thought is, because you would ask, Ed, where are they going to get their information? And it sounds like they're not. What they're doing is they're, as you said, mopping up after something's happened. So, can you talk to us a little bit about what steps can men take either to improve their relationships earlier or to assess their relationship and maybe start moving upstream in terms of being able to build a better relationship and not get to that crisis point or to that breakup point?
Yeah. Um, so I think that the foundations, I often think about the first 90 days, as setting the tone. Um, you know, the idea that there is communication, and the variable is the partner, and you're shifting in life as well. So the idea that you would have that open communication and an honest communication and a way that you could fairly say what you were feeling, thinking, and also listening to the partner, and understanding, their perspective, and that's it's. I think it's as fundamental as that. But there's a lot of taken for grantedness, and there's also a lot of head in the sand stuff. Probably just going through a rough patch. Probably, it'll smooth. It's external things. It's issues about work. So it's really about keeping that communication open, but also having a really good sense of, well, if I'm showing up angry, why am I showing up angry? Like, what's happening for me? And I have to deconstruct what's going on underneath that, not the expression of what I'm feeling, but what am I feeling? So, yeah, again, trying to get guys into that space. There's a lot of work around men and emotions, and I find it interesting. We clearly got them, but sorting them out is hard. And I think sometimes we rush to make sense of things that we might be feeling. Like, I can be happy and sad at the same time. Now, it's going to take me a while to unravel that and untangle that. So I can't rush making sense of that. And I could just express it as anger because because I'm frustrated. I can't get to the bottom of this. So that shows up in a relationship. So again, it's about thinking. It's about work. Doing work on yourself, but also the communication side with partners is massive. So it's trying to introduce those concepts and those constructs, you know, um, early on. I think we should be talking to kids in school, because your relationship with your mates, often it's one-upmanship and teasing. That's what it's based on. It doesn't work in intimate partner relationships at all. Like, so we got to try and have the conversation about what you're feeling, how that shows up, what that means for your relationships, and try to introduce those skill sets. And not to self promote here or anything like that, but we are doing some work with Movember at the moment to build some of these relationship pieces to offer guys the opportunity to fine tune their relationship, go into a relationship feeling more confident that they can show up in the ways they want to. So again, it's great to be able to have that coming down the pipe, and we think that'll be early 2023. That'll be an online, freely available piece to try and help guys with this, because it is hard. It's hard work.
In regards to the one step, are you seeing through your research and your own interactions more fathers and men willing to take that first step?
In terms of development,
Yeah, yeah,
oh yeah, look, there's a cohort of dads who we spoke to with the within the breakup work, end of a relationship, and I think they're the most highly motivated group, because there's third parties involved, and that protector provider piece for most of the guys that we spoke to really prevails as, I'm not happy about this. I'm not happy about what's going on, but I'm going to be selfless in this, and I'm going to have to do the work to get past the bruise and work my way through to make sure those kids are okay, and take the bruise out of the distress that's going on. So a very highly motivated group. We spoke to a lot of guys in that situation, who connected with men's groups, and it was so interesting. What we were hearing is the men's groups would have a code of conduct. So it was not, you could not whine about things.
yeah.
You could talk about what you were feeling and be affirmed in it, and they would be witness to it. They weren't there to solve your problems. They were there to bear witness and to affirm that this is happening to a lot of guys. These transitions, but to the work was around getting to emotions and working through emotions. And I thought really, really interesting, and it's wherever you can get the help, the fit, and a lot of guys were happy in that context. So it was kind of a step back from professional help, but the work was seemingly being really well done from what I could ascertain from it.
Hmm. Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go back to your point about men staying in distressed relationships. And, for, I think it's really important to talk about, what is maybe a distressed relationship, because maybe men aren't aware of it, right? So Ed had asked the question about where are men learning about these aspects of a relationship. Maybe the example that they had isn't really the best example of a healthy relationship. Plus, with the shifting expectations, the shifting dynamics of relationships, I feel like that could be really important. Um, I think the idea of what constitutes distressed relationship and then what steps can somebody take would be really relevant for somebody listening. Because, yeah, so could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think one of the foundational things to identifying distress in a relationship is knowing what is a relationship for you. Like what are your expectations? What do you want from the relationship? What is the connection? Um, and starting from that space, because again, I say a lot of guys, relationships happen to them. And it's like, oh well, no, what were you expecting? What drove it? What did you want to get from this? What was satiating you? And so then the distress, it can be about the transition from the things that were there, and started to change, and it might be because things are happening external to the relationship, or there might be a mismatch or a miscommunication or a breakdown in communication within the relationship. So when things shift and slide, oftentimes guys won't see it as distress. They'll watch it, and they'll go, okay, so I there's assumptions made about the partner's behaviours, and the communication's not there to sort of get to the bottom of what's happening. Like where is this change in behaviour coming? So conflict is really interesting. that's the one we talk about in terms of distress in a relationship. And I think when that dominates the space of the relationship, when that's the front and center, and there's withdrawal and there's change in behaviors, and there's a not disagreement to disagree, there's just a disagreement prevailing, I think there's massive distress in that. And so it's about watching for those changes, but also keeping that communication open in a way that you can talk about what you're seeing shifting and why that might be, to understand it, rather than assuming, oh well, it's, you know, this or it's that, to actually understand it. So I don't know if it answers your question, Drew. Distress, I think, is, I, I don't think there's a kind of a tick box of 5 items. This is what to watch for. I think if you think about your expectations and how the relationship worked well, and then when it didn't, you know, what shifted there, and what constitutes distress. And one of the things guys don't do well is they don't think about their own health in this. If you stay in something that's distressed, it will manifest um, as health issues for you. It'd be mental health, physical health, um, and so that should be another thing that guys are very cued to. You know, you can't be in a distressed relationship and expect to be functioning in the long term.
Okay, good stuff. Well, let's talk about what makes it hard for men to ask for help. We hear this all the time.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what are your thoughts on that?
The help seeking stuff is interesting. Back in the day, we talked about guys not going to the doctor. So, and by extension, what we did, we said the help is a doctor. And it's not true. There's a lot of forms of help. Dad Central is a form of help. So when you get a dad coming to your group and your resources, he's help seeking. Like you know. So, and I would say the same. The internet has opened up a plethora of good and bad information, but there's information there. So there's a lot of help seeking goes online with guys. We've got a website, Heads Up Guys, does depression work for men, and they get 50,000 unique visitors every month to this web. That's a form of help seeking, and so I think we've been a little bit naive in how we've done the count of help seeking, and then said, oh well, guys don't like to get help. Well, yeah, they might be a little bit reticent around professional help, but there's lots of avenues that guys take to try to make sense of things. Professional help it might be needed in some cases for sure, and it might take a little bit of affirmation and continued work to get them into professional help. But again, uh, I think we shortchange guys with the narrative that guys don't go to the doctor and guys don't seek help. There definitely are some challenges, but I think it's a strength based and asset building enterprise these days. Guys recognize that if you can get expert help and you can show up better in your relationship, or have a better mood and better control of your emotions, you know, and better interpretation of your emotions, then I think guys are willing to reach out. Many guys are willing to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I hear the strengths based approach in that response, right? You know, recognizing what's actually men are already doing well. They're already seeking help. They're just maybe not doing it in the ways that others might think or see. So that I hear that strengths based perspective. But the other thought I had is, you know, what we find with Dad Central is that when we tap into those internal motivators for a dad, which typically is helping their child succeed, we tend to draw them in a little bit more, I believe, right? And so I think, to your point, there's a real importance around the messaging, right, and how we communicate about this idea, and how we engage and draw people in, as opposed to categorize them and put them here or there. So I just think that's a really great point, and I love how you framed that response of from a strengths-based perspective, which I think is more draws people in more as opposed to categorizes.
Yeah, and again, back in the day, we'd say, oh well, guys don't go to the doctor because they feel indebted, and now we want to change that narrative, because to say it's courageous to address a problem, however you're going to do it, whether it's the internet, a family member, a friend, or professional help. It's courageous. You got to be you got to It's a strength based approach. You acknowledge that there's a challenge. I need some assistance to get through this, and work my way through it and understand it. So I think it's it's how we tell the story,
Mm.
you know. But I just like to affirm, guys. One of the victories that we firmly believe that blokes help other blokes. I've never, I mean, I offer help all the time. You know, in terms of, mate, if you want to catch up, we have a chat and shoot the breeze, and most of us are really good at that because it's a masculine virtue. It's I got you, I got your back. I can be your wingman. Like it's okay. What we're not good at is going, mate, can you help me out? Can
Mm.
you give me a hand? Because we're a bit shy on it, and I just love to be able to nestle those two together. Because when someone asks me for a hand, and when they if I'm not sensing to offer and they ask, I'm like, I'm all in. I'll give you a hand. It's like it's no burden to me. I want to help. So again, it's just trying to even think about the value of peer, you know, and a good mate, and people that are there for you, because there's a lot of it, and when we isolate, it's very very hard on other people as well as ourselves.
Mm. It's an old phrase: "Men are not good alone."
Hmm. Yeah.
They're not good alone. So I hear you 100% on that. As we start winding it down, we've got one more question for you, and it's does being vulnerable help men become healthier?
Yeah. So um, I read in the New York Times the other day, there was this article, and it troubled me a bit. It was about that men fake vulnerability, and I
Mm.
was like, really? Because so it's more a power assertion. So they were saying that there's been this surge of guys coming out with testimonials that they're vulnerable, they're feeling things, um, they've got weaknesses, or not weaknesses, but they've got challenges. And there was this assertion that they're doing it to protect the privilege of masculine. I'm I'm dumbstruck by it, because we've worked so hard to open up a conversation where blokes can say what's going on for them. I think it's incredibly important. And if that shows up as a vulnerability, if vulnerability is an emotion, then okay, like that can show up. There's other emotions. There's fear. There's anger. There's all sorts of emotions. So if we're opening it up and just norming that you can say something about how you're feeling, I think it'd be a whole lot better than trying to, go back to the 70s and the 80s where we just shut blokes down if they didn't keep in code. So, you know, this vulnerability space at the moment is a bit contested. And I'm sorry for that, because I think the vulnerability piece, it, guys should be able to say how they're feeling, and what they're not certain about, and what they ruminate on and they're not happy with and wish they could change. I think it's an important narrative to 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 engage. I hate to think we would go back to shutting that down. Vulnerabilities are hard. Um, they're hard to talk about. If you've got shame or guilt, they're very hard things to talk about. The last thing I'd ever want to do would be shut down that conversation. If someone's got the strength and the contemporary affirmation to do it, to talk to it, I think it's just so important that we cradle it. To be honest.
True.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's so much importance. Word you just used at the end, this idea of cradle, it's the idea of keeping it safe, right? It's holding it there, allowing there to be a space for this conversation, even, right? That we're even today talking about the idea of being vulnerable and how important it is. And it's so interesting to hear you say it's a space that's being contested. I just think about so that it sense of there's a battle here, and I think that battle is not just externally, but I think it's very much internally for men. I think that there's a battle going on to, can I be vulnerable? Can I not? What's going on? Like there's a lot that um, can stop them from moving into a place where they recognize and understand their own emotions, but also even feel safe to express their emotions in a healthier way, or in a
Yeah.
way that's going to enable others to see them and engage with them and support them to move forward to the place that they want to be, and probably the people around them want to be as well. So I think it's very, very important. I think it's very relevant. And I think, to your point, we need to create the spaces for these conversations to happen. And then, of course, thinking about, well, what does that mean for a family? What does that mean for children as they grow and they see a father who is able to communicate his emotions, or is able to embrace the child's emotions and help them become emotionally aware? I'm going to maybe say one last thing is that I have learned, certainly as I've grown as a father, in my partner journey as well, as adults, so many of us are very emotionally unaware, as well as don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And many times, even in our partner relationships, we don't even feel safe to be vulnerable, and that creates an environment that kind of perpetuates what you've talked about. It's this contented space. We can't access it, and as a result, it seems that we have negative health effects mentally, and then can translate into physically. Whereas if we create spaces for these conversations, we can ultimately move to hopefully a healthier place. Is what it sounds like based on what you're sharing and what the research is saying. So I just think it's really important. Maybe a great point for us to end off on is that we need more of these types of conversations.
Yeah, no, I agree, Drew. You know, the further you get away from what you're feeling, and the further you push it away, even not expressing it, but you're not even prepared to sit with it, um, the harder it gets. You just become, become estranged from your own feelings. So very, very, very challenging. And vulnerability. Um, we all got them. You know, like it's a that just that normative frame of it. Maybe we can dispense with the armor that we put on, and go, hey, yeah, like it's not like I'm the only bloke on the block who's struggling with A, B, and C. Like, we all do, and it's okay, it's all right,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't necessarily even need a solution, but I need to be able to have a safe space to be able to articulate
Yeah.
I just quickly added on. I love the safe space, but after I took a trip to Yellowknife and hung out with the indigenous community, they they incorporated in my mind. We also want a safe space, but we also want a brave space,
Mm-hmm.
a safe and brave space, because you can have a safe space and not move,
it.
and we
Yeah,
want to have a safe and brave space so a father and a man can make a decision and take action.
yeah. I really like that, Ed. I might steal that one off you. That's
Feel
pretty
Very
good.
free.
well said.
I
Feel
like it.
free. Feel free. Well, John, a pleasure as always. It is always a great conversation that we have, whether it's online or offline. And we appreciate the time you've taken to share with us and our community today all around the world.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks again for the opportunity to catch up, and go Broncos.
Yes, that's right.
I
Thank you,
knew
John. The emphasis at the end.
We're saving that, Drew.
That's
I
right.
know. I'm outnumbered today, so if I had my white flag, I'd say I surrender. But you, John, if you want to find out more about John's, I wouldn't say heart work. There's a website address there, menshealthresearch.ubc.ca. Also, he did mention a great resource during our conversation, Heads Up Guys, headsupguys.org. And if you want to follow the work he does also, Twitter at Men's Health UBC. John, any final words you have for our audience and community today?
Just one quick one. We are starting a new project, and it's about men building equitable and sustainable intimate partner relationships. And I'm sure that you've got some folks out there that would be able to contribute to this research. I think it's really important that we start to articulate what an equitable and sustainable relationship is for us in our lives, as a strength-based model. So I personally would love to hear from any guys. You could just email me, john.oliffe@ubc.ca, if you might be interested in learning more about that study, as we start to. We're probably going to start it in July, but be really pleased to hear from anyone who might want to share their point of view.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Great
Thanks,
stuff.
Michael.
We'll see you soon, and I guess we'll be talking during the upcoming football season.
I guess so.
Okay. Have a good one, John. Thanks again for everything.
Okay,
Thank you,
take
John.
care.
Take care. Oh, you Broncos fans. What we gonna
Got to
do?
get it
with
in there, Ed.
I know you. Hey,
That's how we connect.
I saw you wearing a shirt the other day. I didn't say a thing, but now you had me outnumbered this one, so I had no choice. Like I said, next time I'll just bring my white flag and surrender when both you, John, are on it. Just wave the flag.
I hope that's what the teams that play the Broncos do this year too.
Well, we will see. Maybe Russell Wilson can take you to the promised land, but you're in a really tough division this year.
We'll watch and see.
All right. What do you have to say? Great conversation as always with John. It was always good. What do you take away from it?
Probably going to take me a while to just reflect on all of it, but I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is some of his insights about distressed relationships and men choosing to stay in it, and the lack of, I'm going to use this word, intentionality in building healthier relationships, which I think came out of his research. And they want to do that. They want to find, how do we help men build healthier relationships and be more proactive? I think that's really a great takeaway, is that how do we do that? What do we, we've got some resources and tools on Dad Central. We've got Dad's Renovate Your Relationship booklet, 14 tools for relationship health, because we know that transition point you talked about is very challenging. And so these tools help you build positive relationships. We also have information on what's an unhealthy relationship, or recognizing an unhealthy or an abusive relationship, and then taking the next step of how do you get some help. So I think those are important takeaways for me that, dads, men, families can really work on.
Good stuff. So Drew segued nicely. If you want to find out more resources, dads and the dads and fathers and those who love them, there's our website address right there, dadcentral.ca. If you want to email us, the email address is podcast@dadcentral.ca. And then finally, you want to catch great conversations like this one? There we go, dadcentral.ca/podcast. And as always, want to thank Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes in the best of a man, because when care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. So looking forward to the next great conversation. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll catch you soon. Take care.